Amber Heard. She will not let it go. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. It's been several weeks now since the conclusion of the Depp versus Heard trial, but the ramifications of the outcome show no signs of going away just yet, and Amber Heard is certainly being prominent as of late. More about that in other videos. I turn to an article in something called Marker, where the heading states, Amber Heard could hit back at Johnny Depp through multi-million-dollar buck deal. Amber Heard is set to write a buck in the wake of her defamation trial defeat against her former partner Johnny Depp. The actress has reportedly signed a buck deal for what has been described as a tell-all revenge buck. The trial with Depp has been making headlines for months, but it recently concluded, and Heard was the one that did not get what she wanted. She feels that the lawsuit has put an end to her career in Hollywood, and that is why she is pursuing other avenues of work and income, the first of which is a buck telling her side of the story in more depth than has been seen before. Well, interestingly, we've had plenty of depth because we had weeks of evidence provided by both sides. But of course, as has been seen in the recent interview that Heard undertook, she's made reference to therapist notes that weren't admitted quite properly because they were inadmissible in law and were simply what she was saying about what had happened to her, and is not necessarily demonstrative of what has actually happened, as we know that Heard as a narcissist will be prone to the revision of history. Not always, but it will happen in order for her narcissism to enable her to achieve those prime aims. Now we hear that she wants to release a buck, and that the buck deal has already been signed or is in the offing. The article continues by explaining, an insider spoke to OK magazine recently to explain the situation around Heard and what she hopes to achieve with her new venture. Amber considers her career in Hollywood over, the source said. She's already in talks and is excited about it. At this point, she has nothing to lose and wants to tell all. But to the extent that Heard wants to discuss this case and her relationship with Depp in a tell-all statement or buck, she needs to be extremely careful as to what she says about him. Depp and his attorneys will be reading and listening to everything that Heard states. If she crosses the line, which is likely, there is no question that she will be hit with another defamation suit and end up right back in court. In a recent NBC interview, her first public appearance since the verdict, Heard explained how hard it is to be believed online and in the courtroom. What I learned in that trial is, it's never going to be good enough, she said. If you have proof, then it was a scheme. It was a hoax. If you don't have proof, it didn't happen. If you have a bruise, it's fake. If you don't have a bruise, then violence clearly didn't hurt you. If you told people, then you're hysterical. If you didn't tell anyone, it didn't happen. Of course, what she stated in that interview, and I'll be examining that in greater detail presently, is part pity play, part deflection, part triangulation, all part of the nullification of threat to control posed by her defeat in court. There'll be those of you that would sit there and think to yourself, look, you've lost. You've lost heavily. You owe Johnny Depp in the region of $8.3 million. Shut up. Get your head down, find some way of working through this. Don't antagonize him further. He might not want to pursue the damages claim against you. He said that it's more about clearing his name than the money. Why don't you keep your mouth shut? And he might not pursue you for that money, or indeed agree to write it off, and then you can move on with your life. But of course, she can't. Many of you will think to yourself, why don't you just shut up? You've lost. The court's determined that you've lost. Put an end to it. Get on with your life, stop harping on about it. But she can't. The reason being is that her defeat in court, and also in the court of a public opinion, amounts to repeated instances of wounding and challenging. Those two aspects, wounding and challenging, are both forms of a threat to control. Each time, she is reminded that she has an outstanding lawyer's bill. It's a threat to control arising out of the trial. When something's mentioned about Johnny Depp, it reminds her of the trial and her defeat. when she is asked about the circumstances of what happened. It reminds her of the trial and resurrects that threat to control. And therefore, on each and every day, the threat posed by her defeat keeps cropping up. And her narcissism doesn't say, well, you gave it your best shot, and ultimately, it didn't quite work out, but now you need to go and do something more productive and practical. It doesn't deal with it in that way. The way that her narcissism deals with it is this. Namely, this is a threat to control. You must now do something to deal with that, either directly, indirectly, or by withdrawal. Remember, as an unaware narcissist, she doesn't actually consciously think in those terms. Her narcissism is doing that under the surface. And in order to nullify the threat to control that's posed by the repeated presence of her defeat in court, her narcissism causes her to dole out the deflection and the pity plays bleating in the NBC interview. That it now has caused her to look to write a book, which could only probably end up dropping her in further hot water, as, because she can't learn from her experiences because her narcissism won't let her, she's likely to repeat the same mistakes that she has done when she wrote the op-ed which led to her being dragged into court in the first place. In the book, unless it is absolutely edited extremely by the relevant attorneys so that nothing that could be actioned is included, she is going to transgress that line because her narcissism is pushing and pushing and pushing for her through a sense of entitlement, a lack of accountability, an absence of emotional empathy, and the need to control by telling her side of the story. You may have noticed recently there's a lot of people talking about my truth, my narrative. And that is a manifestation of how there is a failure to accept a state of affairs because it doesn't accord with the view that they have. I want you to hear my truth, not the truth, my truth. Heard's narcissism drives her to nullify the threat to control. And rather than think, well, hang on a second, if she says all of these things, writes them down in this particular book which is published, they could be libelous, she could be on the receiving end of another defamation action, and where will that lead to? It doesn't, because her form of narcissism isn't thinking ahead. All it's thinking about is, in that moment, how can we gain the prime aims? How can we get that control, that fuel, that character trait, and those residual benefits? And it doesn't have due regard for the consequences. Her PR team might be thinking about the consequences. Her lawyers, if they've been paid, might be thinking about those consequences. But she is not. And therefore, that's why narcissists such as her never learn. That they make the repeated mistakes. That they keep going on and on and on about how hard done to they have been. How, of course, she is the victim, the eternal victim, a victim of domestic abuse, a victim of bullying and trolling online. Indeed, there has been trolling and bullying online, but she can't see that in effect she brought it on herself with regard to her own behaviour. She cannot comprehend, she cannot compute, she cannot work out why she lost. She cannot work out why people don't like her, because in her world, she is the victim. And her narcissism will not let her drop this. She can't let go because her narcissism will not let it happen. Amber Heard's narcissism will create this concept of a quest for justice. She, with her rampant victim mentality, sense of entitlement, and belief that she is a decent person, that is issuing a clarion call for all domestic abuse victims worldwide, believes that it is incumbent upon her to speak this truth, her truth. Her narcissism causes her to believe that she is right. Her narcissism causes her to believe that she is the victim. Her narcissism continues to cause her to believe that Johnny Depp has manipulated his way to securing favour in the court of public opinion and that he manipulated his way and continued to abuse her through the court action that he brought. Her narcissism will not allow her to see that she told lies. Her narcissism will not allow her to see how she contradicted herself with regard to the evidence. Her narcissism will not allow her to see that she is the one that is in the wrong. She has an unwavering belief that she is the one that has been hard done to. She believes that she is the victim in all of this. She will appear to make certain concessions. For instance, she talked about not being the perfect victim, but that's just a form of pity play, as if to say, okay, I guess some of you don't like me, but really you ought to because, hey, I'm not the abuser, he is. The repeated threats to her control that have been occasioned by Depp's victory, and of course the subsequent reporting of the same, the questions that have been asked mean that there are repeated threats to her control, and her narcissism has to deal with that. It has to nullify them. She is not in a position just to say, well, that's the end of that, but instead it causes her to need to take these steps, some of which may prove to be even more detrimental to her for the reasons that I advanced earlier. She will not let it go. She's talking about this book and issuing more about her side of the story, because her narcissism will not let it stop, and thus she will continue in this manner. There will be more to be seen with regard to her repeated attempts to address what she sees as a fundamental injustice with regard to what has happened to her. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.